Okay, part 2, sorry, kina-stop na ako akong previous nga gi-record. So, let's continue. So, again, continuation na siya sa internal accruals. So, that's it. It has a very limited ang iyang quantity due to, again, we will only base it on our incomes, revenues sa atong company. So, diya siya mo revolve. Next is high opportunity cost, dividends forgone by equity shareholders. So, dako siya opportunity cost, daghan ka siya masayang, especially when it comes to time and utilization sa imong money. So, ang mga dividends kay masayang due to, again, wala man kay to siya na use due to kay nag-focus ka sa internal accruals. So, the opportunity cost unta to gain more for your investors would be hectic or dili na kay siya ma-effective. So it requires careful attention to net profit value of the project. So you really need to look for the net profit value because that impacts very well when it comes to financing. So again, as I said, diba, those ratios are basis for our financial institutions or mga financial na mga firms. Dito nila makita or basihan if our performance on our payables and our long-term finances is efficient enough to pay them. Okay, to pay them at sa atuang for example, we tend to mag-utang ta for our capital. So, diyan nila i-check sa net present value. So, you really need to be very careful when it comes to the net profit value of, let's say, for example, imong mga project or imong, sa imong work itself. So that is for internal accruals. So, more on, again, imong giparoling imong money. Next is we have preference capital. So what is preference capital? So this is a hybrid form of financing, payment after debt but before equity. So hybrid daw siya nga financing because ang payment daw ni mo after sa imong utang but before sa imong equity. So medyo kuan siya kanang libog kay hybrid naman siya, combination naman siya. So again, imuhang bayad nga gihimo before ka nangutang and also before sa imuhang equity. So this is what we call preference capital. So it has some features. So out of distributable profits, non-obligatory payment, dividends not tax deductible. Mupong nakanay sa aning preference capital. Kay iyahang features is dili siya ma-distribute nga profit, dili siya out of distributable profit, dili mabaligya or ma-share ng preference capital. So it is not also obligatory to pay such capital sa imong business. So this actual capital is focused on gaining money for the company itself. So that's it. So dili siya obligatory nga payment for our investors. So ang iyaya pong dividend is dili siya deductible. So that is for its equity nga features. So hybrid ba siya? So combination of at least pila ka features. So the first one, equity. Next is we had also debt. Kay ang preference capital is focused on us raising enough funds or money for your company. So this is good as shareholders fund or equity capital, but the difference is that wala sila voting rights. So dili sila good, more like half lang. They only owe half of the company or half to zero ownership compared to equity capital itself. So it has debt features. So the dividend rate is fixed. So for example, as a debt, Iyaha daw dividend rate is fixed, probably 8%, 10% lang imong dividend rate per year. So bahalag ni dako na or ni mubo, more good ang among bayaran sa imuha. Next is capital is redeemable, so it can be withdrawn anytime. So for example, invest ka for your sa ilang preference capital, then you can withdraw it anytime. Kay wala man kay hold actually sa company. Wala po hold ang company sa imuha. So, iyan na siya ka-simple. Yung focus is to gain more financing sa preference capital. So, normally, no right to vote. So, again, same compared sa equity capital, kani sila is wala sila right to vote due to dili sila wholly part of the organization. So, they can have other features like cumulative, convertible, participating. So, napos sila mga features. Ang naka-nice kay they are convertible, dali lang kay siya ma-liquidate. So, very liquid. It is participating given nga dali ra po siya ma-source out. So, they really tend to participate. More siya good as additional nga tao. Okay, additional hands when it comes to managing your business. So we have advantages of preference capital here. So no obligation to pay dividend, no bankruptcy or legal action for non-payment. So wala sila obligation again ang company to pay dividends sa preference capital because dili kay sila part sa company itself. So the company is not obliged. So it depends silang agreement. Next is financial distress of redemption obligation not very high. So the distress of redemption daw sa obligation is dili ka siya very high because again dili kayo siya likely ma-withdraw man siya anytime but dili kay siya appealing to withdraw kay probably gamay pa yung profit, gamay pa yung halin. So need magud nimo timing when ka mag-withdraw sa imuhang when ka mag-withdraw og invest again sa imong money. So more siya kanabit ang stocks nga makita. So yes, more like something like that. Stocks in which you need to mamugod ang typical stock na scenario. Kung taas gay ang price sa stock, that means nga tsada siya ibaliga. Kung mubo ang price sa stocks, that means tsada siya paliton. Mag-add ka nga mag-add. Mag-wait ka nga mo, taas siya. So that's the financial redemption, that obligation. Next is part of net worth, hence increases its creditworthiness, leverage capacity. Kaya part man siya ang preference capital itself sa net worth, especially leverage ratio, your creditworthiness would go up. Mas appealing siya sa mga financial institutions, sa mga investors too. So no dilution of control, no pledging of assets required. So there's no need for you to assign asset ani sa iya. So in case mag-bankrupt ka, wala kay makuha ang mga mga people nga nag-invest of preference capital because they are again more good as di sila pure-blooded nga part sa imuhang let's say for example organization. So no pledging of assets required. So that means nga sure good nga makuha nilang money anytime because dili naman need mag what do you call that one, mag-assign or designate og assets sa ilahadaan with the same amount sa ilang finance. So that's it for advantages. Next is we have disadvantages of preference capital. Kaya naman tayo mga advantages which are good, we also have disadvantages. The number one is expensive siya nga source since dividends is not tax deductible. So medyo gasto siya sa part sa investor. Again, kay wa man ka nag-minus og tax. That means nga okay, kay wa man ka nag-minus og tax. That means nga mas dako ang imuhang cost, imuhang bayaran sa imuhang gi-invest. Imo pong ma-receive. Though no legal consequences, liability to pay dividend stands can spoil company's image. So if possible daw, your liability to pay them. Okay, di ba wala man, dili man siya compulsory whether you give them dividends or not. But if possible, you need to give them para po mas maganahan sila sa inyong company. Because good as liability, pwede mo siya to pay them sa ilahang dividends. Especially if nagit sila halin sa inyong company. Next is can acquire voting rights in some cases. So depende sa arrangement. They can have voting rights, especially if dili reach ang consensus, then most likely depende sa situation or sa case itself. Have claim prior to equity holders. So another disadvantages, you have claimed out other prior to equity holders. So claim prior to equity holders. Claim prior to equity holders. Okay, so this is where you as a investor of preference capital, you tend to priority yourself compared to the equity shareholders, given that you are not part unta sa company legally. So, or on paper, wala dili ka part sa ila kay at least pila lang ka percent bidang inyo ha. So, good as third party if you're a part of the preference capital. So, have claim prior to equity holders. So, those are disadvantages of preference capital. So, next is we have long-term, term loans. So, the first one, okay, let's recall. The first one is more on equity capital. Second, we have internal accruals. Next is preference capital. So the next topic shall be term loans. So what are term loans? So these are provided by financial institutions or banks. They can be domestic or foreign currency, liability on foreign Okay, can be in domestic or foreign currencies, such as liability daw on funding circle. Okay, funding circle translated to rupees for payment. So example daw sa India, based on our liabilities atong mga bayaran, we need to translate our dili mo siya translate ang word, convert our monetary value to the domestic or foreign currency that we have in order to at least know the value and to have more smoother transaction. So again, this can be done, term loans can be done in mostly sa gawas ng mga banks if ever nga i-approve. Next are typically secured. So they are against fixed assets, hypothecation of movable properties, prime security, collateral security. So term loans are typically secured because marama na siya magpa-collateral ka. That's why secured siya. So if di ka kabayad, probably bawion ang imong mga assets, fixed assets such as imong balay, ang imong building, imong cars, and so on and so forth. So anything that can worth up to the loan ng imong use, values imong loan. So that's why term loans are secured due to collaterals. Okay. Next is definite obligations on interest and principal repayment. So interest paid periodically based on credit risk and pegged to a floor rate. So they have definite obligation. So at least definite, defined due to interest and principal payments. So when it comes to loan, fixed na pud ang amount ni imong i-borrow. Kay fixed naman siya, you'll know your obligation. Pila ang need mo bayaran, pila ang imong interest nga makuha, and so on and so forth. Lastly, carry restrictive covenants for future financial and operational decisions of the company. So its management, future fundraising, projects, periodic reports, and so on and so forth. So they carry restrictive covenants daw, especially when it comes to sa imong mga finances, sa imong operations sa business. Kay kuan man, you really need to focus on paying such term loans. If possible, the shorter the time frame, the more. The more na siya nga the more nga okay, the more you'll have payment, the more you have payables, so that's it. So the longer it is, the higher its interest, mas dako siya sa imong gasto, ma-additional siya based on interest. So if possible, dudugid ka sa shorter nga term loans. So that's it for the introduction for what a term loan is. So we have advantages of term loan. So, but before that, term loans is from the word itself, term. Per term is most likely per year, or let's probably per quarter, depending on your agreement. So, for example, we have term loans, 10-year term, 5-year term loan, and so on and so forth. Kasi you'll know taas siya, longer. The longer the time, the more probably imong ma-borrow. So it has advantages and disadvantages too. So its first advantage is it has interest on debt. Interest on debt is tax deductible. So ang iya daw interest sa utang is na siya tax. Pwede siya minusan og tax. Next is does not result in dilution of control. So nice kaya po siya ang ilang pag-practice sa term loans kay dili po siya maka-cost og delusion or kanang chaos sa inyong mga clients or customers, because there is delusion of control. So no one tends to take over something. Okay, term loans isn't part of their let's say for example pag-court or pag-propose. So do not partake in value created by the firm. So they do not partake sa kanabitang value added na mga activities. Such as for example, i-appeal siya sa di ba gamiton man nga loan for financing sa capital. So kay i-appeal mo siya sa capital, dili kay siya gaan og value sa firm due to these are commercial good as prepaid ng mga expense. Okay. Because these are term loans. So these are already fixed and final, and there's no need for anyone to give it more value because naset naman siya daan. Next is issue cost of debt is lower. So ang ihadang issue cost is lower, especially when it comes to utang. And that's good. Kaya imong stocks probably is again lower. Mas attractive siya sa mga investors, mga businessmen. Interest cost is normally fixed, protection against high unexpected inflation. So fixed gyapon yung interest cost again because these are already gisettle na. Okay, gisettle na nga mga transaction. Next is has a disciplining effect on management. Due to term loans, ma-discipline mo good ka because when it comes to paying monthly or yearly, you'll automatically know nga okay na paday ko bayaran. I need to adjust. Di lang sa ko palabi og gasto kay na paday ko bayaran nun sa 15, na ko bayaran nun sa 20. So, and so on and so forth. So that's why it has a disciplining effect. So those are its advantages. Now we'll be talking about the disadvantages of term loans. So it entails fixed obligation for interest and principal. Non-payment can even lead to bankruptcy, legal action. So our term loan is again kay fixed naman siyang obligation, especially for interest and principal. So if di ka kabayad, it will really lead to bankruptcy or legal action. Makasuhan pud ka diretso if dili ka kabayad sa ilaha because we are talking about term loans. When it comes to term loans, tinag-as nga mga year. Kung tag-as ang year, that means mas taas pud ang imuhang i-loan, especially for your business. Kaya di na makakabalik og loan sa ila. So, ibulto na po nimo og bali for good as 10 years. So, with that, kung di ko daw kakabayad, sure nga, mag-bankrupt gid daw ka. Because, dako kay kagbayaran nun. Okay? So, monthly or yearly. So, debt contracts impose restrictions on firms' financial and operational flexibility. So they tend to impose restriction daw sa financial and operational flexibility because you need to work around the same number. Let's say, for example, naka-term loan of 10,000 per month. Okay, so 10,000 per month, good as 120,000 per year. So these contracts are already fixed and final. Once you sign, that means that you had agreed. So, dahil kag mga dili di pwede himuon or gamitan sa money. So, that's an example. So, they increase financial leverage, excess raises cost of equity to the firm. So, we also have financial leverage here. Another disadvantage sa term loans because their financial leverage would lower down. Wala na kay gusto wala din kay gusto kuan sila invest due to leverage ratio or let's say profitability ratio nga naa sa ilaha. So, moto, that's another thing to consider when it comes to finding out some ratios. Next is if inflation rate dips, cost of debt higher than expected. So if kung matunong po kag inflation, mas mo gasto tanan, mas mo mahal, that means nga, mas mo mahal po na imuhang interest. Mas mataas din yung interest, most probably, imuhang mga cost of debt is higher. So imuhang mga burden is much higher sa kaninga mga company due to, again, inflation. So those are the disadvantages of term loan. So, at least tulo or upat natong na-discuss nga sources of financial financing. So, we have equity, internal accruals, we have, preference capital, next is term loans. So, we have the last guess, we have debentures. Okay, debentures. So what are debentures? So these are like promissory notes. They are instruments for raising long-term debts. So more siya good as promissory note daw or notes payable. So these are more flexible compared to term loans as they offer variety of choices as regards maturity, interest rate, security, repayment, and other special features. So, mas nice daw ni siya, mas flexible ang debenture kesa atong mga fixed nga term goals. Because ang maturity ug interest kay sometimes fixed naman siya for the next 10 years. Compared to debentures, pwede pa ka mag-adjust. So, interest rate can be fixed, floating, dip, discount. So, again, interest rate, pwede po daw siya finalize. Okay, depende na po gyapon sa inyong agreement. We have convertibility here. So they can be, okay, so some debentures can be converted into equity shares. So again, kay utang man ni sila, they can be converted into equity shares daw or preference share. So they can be fully convertible. Okay, they can be fully convertible debentures, non-convertible, or partially convertible nga debentures. So that's it. Again, pwede siya ma-change into working capital too. Depende sa imo use or gamit. So warrants, they can have warrants attached, detachable, or non-detachable. Detachable traded separately. So, pwede siya attach sa imong capital, sa imong equity or not. It depends on you. So, pwede mo siya i-withdraw anytime. It always depends on the agreement between you and the third party. So, that is debentures. More on, again, promissory note. Promissory note siya for the long-term nga investment or term financing. So we also have options. So they can be with call or put option. So this is an option for you. You can talk through phone or other options like meetings. Redemption, bullet payment, or redeemed in installment. So we have another term too. You can have bullet payment. Bullet payment means nga kana bitong imo siyang gi bulto-bulto mo siya more siya og bulk payment. So more siya imong gibulto og pay sa iyang installment para di na ka ma-stress or mahago. So that is bullet payment. For security, it can be secured or unsecured depending. Okay, it always depends for security. Credit rating, need to have a credit rating by a credit rating agency. But before daw ka makaget og debentures, you need to have a credit rating. Dapat mabalaan nila nga you have good credit points. Okay? May kamubayad. So that means nga aprobahan good kanila. So next we have trustee. So this is the need to appoint a trustee to ensure fulfillment of contractual obligations by a company. So you need to vote someone who can represent you, represent all of our investors, our shareholders by the company. So you need to, again, ensure fulfillment of contractual obligations. Next is we have DRR. Okay, so DRR means debenture redemption reserve. Okay, so that's what it meant by DRR. So the company needs to create a debenture redemption reserve if maturity more than 18 months. So this is where kana bitang mga payback period sa investor nila. So once they have their money, so at least they can be secured na dayon for at least 18 months. No, depending sa kuan gapon sa scope sa let's say sa shareholders or sa dividends. So company needs to create a debenture redemption reserve in order for them to at least di sila ma-zerohan sa mga people nga willing to pay or sponsor, okay, sa kuan sa tong term financing. So that's for debentures. So I hope that's clear. Again, this one focus more on utang, atong utang itself. So we also have other forms of finance. More man to siya mostly ang sources of financing. So let's continue the other forms. We have leasing. So familiar mo sa pag-lease. So asset leased out in lieu of lease rentals, title not transferred, only economic use of assets given. Can be financial lease or operating or service. So leasing is as good as nag-abang ka or nag-rent ka sa isa ka property nga dili imuha. So that's another source of finance. You have mga leasing ng mga buildings in which magbayad sila sa imuha. So makasustain na siya actually in the long run, especially if you have, for example, maayo po yung mga borders. So next, you can hire purchase, ownership transferred to the buyer after all the installments paid up. So hire purchase is where again ownership nag-transfer sa buyer. Sa yung magipang-install is paid up. So hire purchase. So you tend to again transfer ang katong imuhang gi-loan. For example, sa isa ka people, siya na magbayad sa imuha. So you hire that person in order to pay your other debt. So next is securitization. So these assets involve financial claims pooled and financial instruments created, thus creating cash out of receivables. So securitization is where assets, they tend to be involved sa financial claims and use that as an element, especially creating cash out of receivables. So you tend to focus more on your collectibles so that you can secure yourself and the country or the company you have. Next, we have government subsidies. So central and state governments offer cash subsidies to units in backward areas, classified in 3 categories. So I guess familiar mo sa government subsidies, kanang mga 4Ps. Okay, these are sponsored by the government and the state itself. So that's another term, ay long-term financing. So di ba yahay ka sila pang long-term na gyud, pang lifetime to nila nga kuan nga halin, for example. So next we have sales tax deferments and exemption. So payment deferred for a fixed period, like interest-free loan or exemption given for a certain number of years. So sales tax from deferments and exemptions, dako niya po ni siya og halin, mostly focus ni siya sa revenue nimo. So payment daw for a fixed period, especially sa interest-free loans. So mura kag na nakalas. So katong mga sobra ni mga revenue, you can really revenue or halin, you can really use that as part of your financing. Next is supplier's credit. So available from supplier to machinery, other fixed assets, terms advised to defer payment or pay in installment over a period of time. So that is supplier's credit. Again, you tend to have to supply on credit. So mag-deliver ka nga mag-deliver hantod nga bayran la ka. So mag-deliver ka og let's say for example inputs or fixed assets sa imuhang company. So ang pagbayad lang dayon is basin i-installment or iapas lang siya ang bayaran nun. So that's another form of financing. Supplier's credit. So gaan na kanya supply daan. So supply now, pay later. So more nga na ilahang kasabutan. Okay, nagbalik. So we have the words here. We have leasing versus hire purchase. So what is the difference between leasing or hire purchase? So for leasing, ownership is not transferred to leasee. Kay ikaw man nangutang, kay ikaw man ang nag-borrow sa funds, so dili siya ma-transfer sa leasee. When it comes to long-term nga financing, because you are the one who is obligated ana nga loan, for example. So depreciation benefit to lesser. So depreciation benefit to lesser. So you have a benefit. So ikaw man ang, ay, katuding lesser, na siya benefit sa depreciation. So dili na kay siya need mag-calculate sa depreciation, but iyang ihatag sa next. Okay? Sa next nga mag-use. For example, sa car. So next is the magnitude of funds high for big tickets items. So ang magnitude of funds means nga the higher you have leasing power or loaning power, okay, the more ticket you'll get. So leasing, again, more on rent. So next is no margin money, down payment required. So mas nice, given nga wala sila asset na daan nga mga minimum down payment and so on and so forth. That's for, again, for rentals. Next is maintenance of assets by lesser in operating lease. So, gina-maintain po datong asset given nga, let's say for example, nag-rent sila sa imuhang planta, kay nagubaan sila kuno sa ilahang planta. For that's an example. Kay naguba man or moto, you need to maintain it through so kay na may benefit ang lesser sa depreciation, na po siya obligation to maintain tong asset kay ikaw man ang nag-use. Okay, for example, na kay apartment. So ikaw si leasee. Okay, ikaw di si lessor, sorry. So ikaw si lessor. So you need to maintain imong apartment. Dapat limpyo siya, wala siya guba-guba o siya lubak-lubak. So that's another thing to consider for magpa-rent. So tax benefits of depreciation taken by lessor. Lessee gets tax shield on lease rentals. So tax benefits sa depreciation kay nasa lessor po. Dili siya maabot sa leasing kay rent raman siya, temporary raman na siya nga arrangement. Mubalik raman sa imuha ang imuhang, let's say for example, giparent nga apartment or giparent na machine. Mabalik raman sa imuha. So, okay, under pa man sa imong name, that means nga under po ang tax sa imong name. So, considered off balance sheet mode of financing as okay, so considered off balance sheet mode of financing and no asset or liability figures in the balance sheet. So under our rent, dili kay siya need nga i-reflect due to there are no assets daw or liabilities sa balance sheet. So that's for leasing. So the next one is we have hire purchase. So ownership transferred to hire on payment of all installments. So that is what happened. The ownership again is transferred to the hirer. Katong let's say for example HR. On payments iyang i-install. So that's ownership transferred to hirer on payment. So depreciation shield available to hirer. So kung ikaw daw nag-hire na kay shield, dili kay ka madutlan og tax or depreciation itself. Maybe for smaller value capital goods. So hire purchase is from smaller daw nga value to capital goods ang need nimo i-buy, especially for grocery. So some down payment requirements. As you all know, as being part of these or being or you want to be part of their organization, you need to be part of their society siguro. So some down payment is required depende kung ma-require sila or not. So maintenance cost borne by hirer. So ang maintenance cost is nasa hirer, dili sa purchaser. So higher allowed depreciation claims and finance charges for taxation. Seller may claim interest on the amount borrowed to acquire assets. And assets figures in balance sheet on complete purchase. So for higher purchase, they allow depreciation daw sa financial na charge, especially for taxation because the seller, they they tend to claim interest on amount borrowed to acquire assets. So they tend to know if it is true or not based on observation. Sakto ba ni ang atong languyan? So that's an example. So that's the asset figures in balance sheet in complete purchase. Okay, naduhaan ako. So that's it. That's all for today, everyone. So I hope that's clear to all of you. We have some very unique and nice na long-term financing. So from leasing to hire purchase to equity capital, preference capital, and debentures. So thank you everyone. If you have any question or clarification, please feel free to message me through my Facebook account. This is all for today. Thank you and goodbye.